Good. Hello, everyone from all around the world. Good afternoon, good morning, good evenings. My name is Shadow Chin. I'm the CEO of Circular Taiwan Network. I'm happy to host this webinar here in our office in Taipei. So for this webinar, we have more than 350 participants from 5 continents, including Europe, including Africa, Middle East. There are even Southeast Asia, Haiti, Australia, and of course, Taiwan. So welcome everyone here. It has been a really crazy year, I think, for all of us. This coronavirus outbreak actually absolutely disrupts our life for this year. So it has broken many records, including, for instance, 2/3 of people are restricted with mobilities and with the high unemployment rates, with also the carbon emission cuts. So it has, for me, I can't stop wondering, if this COVID is a message from this Mother Earth, what does it try to tell us? So in Chinese language, I think of our word for crisis, 危机. So 危 means threat or danger, and 机 means opportunities. So these two things are deeply embedded within each other. So with all the efforts that we try to recover the economy, will we go back to normal, or will we build back better, or actually we will create the lock-in that takes generations to recover. So that's why we set up the series. So we want to discuss what this journey could look like and co-create this with you. Today, I'm so happy to have participants from 3 continents, 3 countries. So I'd like to introduce you. Maybe let's start from the furthest. So Freek van Eijk is the CEO of Poland Circular Hotspot. As you can already see his background. He is also the managing director of Accelerator and an advisory board member of the World Biogas Association. So hi, Freek, and maybe you can let us know a little bit update of what's happening there in the Netherlands.
Good morning, Shadow. Greetings from the Netherlands. Good to be in a webinar organized by the Circular Taiwan Network. Well, let's get serious immediately. Yes, we're experiencing some serious issues with COVID-19 as well. The world came to a stop, supply lines were broken, demand decreased, and the way it looks right now is that the end of this year, we will have a GDP dip of 6%. Unemployment will increase to 5%, next year 7%, that's double from now. So yes, this is something which we will feel for many years to come. Probably only in 2023 we will be back to normal. That having said that, I think it will a challenging time for small circular economy startups. They will be hit hard. They're in survival mode. But on the long term, however, I think circular economy is there to stay, and it offers the best possible way out for the future. But that's a teaser for a presentation later. So if you want a quick update, that's it.
Awesome. Okay, and next one, I'd like to introduce Marc from Circle Economy. So he is the director of Global Alliance, and he leads many great studies, including the Circular Gap report, which he will show later. Hi, Marc.
Good morning. Thank you, Shadow. Thanks, Circular Taiwan, for the great opportunity to speak. Yeah, I'm actually speaking from Amsterdam in the Netherlands, so similar to Freek. So I won't go into all the things that Freek said about the situation also here. Maybe to add that the president of our central bank said that if COVID-19 is a meteorite, climate change is a collision of planets. So really warning that there's something much greater also about to happen. And I think this really is a stress test for the global economy, but we need to brace for more. But I'm also gonna end on a positive and an optimistic note in my speech later on. So let me maybe stop there, and I'll have the floor in a couple minutes, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Marc. So next one, we have Leanne Kemp from Australia. So she is the founder and CEO of Everledger, her own company It's an innovative company that uses technology to track resources. And she's also appointed as Queensland Chief Entrepreneur. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, everyone. Fantastic to be connected. I'm super looking forward to this conversation today. 14 countries are connected to this call, and we have some of the best brains that are connected on this webinar. So I'm super excited to be connected. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, we can see that Leanne is wearing her shawl, so it's winter there. Yeah. And the next one, we have Steve. Steve Lai is a supply chain expert. He served as a chairperson of Taiwan Alliance of Sustainable Supply and board member of International Federation of Purchasing and Supply Management. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Shadow. Hi, everyone. It's great to have this opportunity to hear the opinion and the input from all the people, expertise from all around the world. And the situation here in Taiwan is pretty much safe and healthier. And because we will probably be called as one of the safest places in the world. And the government, the people has done a pretty good job on how to avoid this COVID-19. So I'm really appreciate this effort by all our people, and looking forward to listen and also learning from all of you today. I'm so looking forward to it.
Thank you, Steve. And the next one, we have Charles Wong, the chairman of Circular Taiwan Network, so my boss. He is the person that brings up all the circular economy movement in Taiwan. And he has served many positions also in private and public sectors. Hi, Charles Wong.
Hi, hello everybody. Well, first off, I'd like to thank everybody from as far as Netherlands and Australia to join us. It's been our honor. I look forward to our conversation today. And let me quickly follow up on what Shadow mentioned earlier about, viewing this crisis as an opportunity. And indeed, Taiwan has been very lucky. We have not been affected as much as it is other parts of the world. But in any event, I think all parts of the corner have been affected by this pandemic. And the way I look at this pandemic is what I call a fortune in disguise, in my opinion. I think we all need a wake-up call. And I think the wake-up call ought not to be wasted. In other words, the last thing we want to do is we want to waste another crisis. And how do we turn that into an opportunity? And so I see that as an opportunity. And secondly, over the last couple of months, and I have been asked about, what can we do in response or in the aftermath of the pandemic? And the way I look at it is that generally people talk about economic recovery as a challenge. And I'm sort of a bit shy from talking about recovery, because I think what we ought to be thinking about is it's not so much an opportunity for recovery, especially if we recover back to linear models. What we really need to do is sort of like reinvent the economy as we go through, rather than recovery. And I think it's in that context I would like to share my view a little bit later after all of you, or after I have the opportunity to learn from every one of you. Thank you once again for coming.
Thank you, Charles. And then so in this webinar, we have 75 minutes. We will have 10 minutes of presentation from each presentation for each speakers. And then after that, we have a short poll and we have room for Q&A. Yeah, so let's start with Marc. He has some interesting story to tell us from a global perspective.
Well, thanks again for the great opportunity to exchange views with really people from across the globe. I would like to speak today about linear risk, and also on the flip side of that, circular opportunities. So really looking at, well, what really can we learn from the COVID situation we're in, but actually what can we learn from the last 100 or 200 years in how we've built our economy, and zoom into some of the elements that I think we already saw we wanted to change, but now, as Charles just said, we can accelerate the pace of doing so. So I think it's always good to start with what is really the major challenge we're looking at. And for me, this picture always shows that very clearly. So what you see here is in the white line, how since 1900 we have increased our global GDP to 60 trillion US dollars in 2017. And you see that in the blue line, and really the blue kind of shade you see in the bottom, that is the material extraction. So all the iron ore we've used, the fossil, the oil, the minerals, the biomass. So we basically fueled our economic progress by material extraction. And the key challenge is to keep on going with that white line. So increase prosperity still, but really reconnect that and decouple that from our material use. That's really fundamentally the challenge. And I think it's good always to say that that linear model that we've carefully created in the last 200 years has brought so much wealth to many people on the planet, definitely not all, in some places of this world and at certain times, but it has never done so for everyone at all times. And I think what we also see that embedded deeply within that linear model, we see a very toxic cocktail of negative consequences. So climate breakdown, but also social inequality. And I want to focus on where can we kind of change that picture, but also get a better understanding for where those real risks are and how can we systematize that approach. Because as I said, what is the consequence of this model? Well, it's sometimes this is a picture from Brussels where you see kind of also smog pollution in the air. So that's one of the key elements that we face on a daily basis. And I think for everyone across the globe, or at least many living in urban areas. At the same time, and this is also what COVID has shown us, you see an aerial or a satellite picture here on nitrous oxide emissions in Europe. The dark spot here is northern Italy, where you see January before COVID hit and then March. And obviously we see a temporary improvement of that situation. And I think, again, that we've seen this picture across the globe. But I'm not convinced that if we start to relax these measures, that this is here to stay. So although we can see some of the elements that may be positive, at least in terms of the environment of the COVID, we have not structurally reoriented our economy, which is very much needed. Not only for ecological reasons, but also because our current approach to resource management also shows that we just have a shortage of materials to build our economy and to prolong the line of material extraction that I've just shown. For example, when you look at agriculture and phosphorus, which is a finite resource coming out of mines in just a couple of places around the world, but also lithium to fuel electric driving and an increased demand for batteries, or indium and other rare earth metals to facilitate the energy transition. So it's also really looking at shortages of supply. And also related to that, there are risks related to disturbances of global supply chains. And now I want to make the transition to linear risks. So we wrote a paper already in 2017, including also with well-known accountancy firms like KPMG. And we wanted to look at, well, what does it mean for a business or society at large to, when they aspire to go towards circular economy, what actually are the risks that they now have in their business, in their portfolio, that we can call linear risks, but they actually have no real understanding of what they are, and therefore what their exposure to that is. And I think interestingly enough, in 2017, we had some warning remarks on the fact that that wasn't very visible. And I think what we clearly see in this day and age is how that can manifest itself very clearly on all relevant levels. So on the level of the company, of the supply chain, but even also of the global economy. And then making that pivot, Shadow, you mentioned it already. Every year for the third year, last January, we launched the Circularity Gap Report. We do that at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And I refer to the picture that you see now as an X-ray of our global economy. So really what this shows on the left is how we use 4 resources: minerals, ores, fossil fuels, biomass, and really what our global economy is in terms of delivering key societal needs like housing, mobility, healthcare, nutrition, etc. So this is really kind of the complexity boiled down on one slide of our global economy. And then on the right, you see how we are extremely wasteful in dealing with these resources. So it goes into the air in terms of CO2. It's being dispersed like plastics through our oceans into or through our rivers into the oceans. And only at the bottom right, you see that we only cycle back into our economy a very small fraction. And actually, that small fraction is only 9%. So I think that's good to understand when we start looking more into these linear risks. And what are linear risks? Basically, we define those as the exposure to the effects of continuing a linear business practice. And then seeing how that can negatively impact your organization's ability to continue. So to have a healthy revenue, to retain and create meaningful jobs for your personnel. And we look at two dimensions for that. So on the one hand, we look at linear business practices. So that is, for example, keep on using non-renewable resources like oil, and other fossil resources. The other one is being very much fixed in a model where you prioritize the sales of new products. So continuously pushing them in the market without taking responsibility for the fact that they also become and end up as waste. Another one is really if you fail to collaborate. So really if you become too much inward focused and therefore are not able to seize opportunities that come from collaboration. And the other one is really when you fail to innovate or adapt. So many of the incumbents of the established industries can very easily be disrupted by newcomers to the market. And at least having a keen understanding of those is crucial if you want to survive. So that's one dimension. And the other one is, well, what are then the levels of impact of that linear risk? And I will not go into detail. You can read more of this in the paper, but I want to focus on 4 elements of that. So that is related to market risk. So that is related, for example, to price volatility on global markets, but also to trade patterns and disturbances in that. Then there is the operational risk. So related much more to supply chains you're embedded in globally. And what if something goes wrong somewhere in that supply chain? What are the effects for yourself? Then, of course, you have your business risks. So what are changes of business or consumer demand changing? And lastly, there are legal and regulatory risks. So that is really if the policies on certain, for example, renewable or sustainable measures increase, to which extent is your business exposed and being adaptable to that new situation? What we've done with both of those dimensions, so on the one hand, you have the market elements, and on the horizontal, you have the linear business practices. And we created a matrix out of that. And I think I wanted to show it, but I encourage you to look at the document to get a full grasp. But I wanted to highlight 2 examples. And then in 2 minutes, that is the end of my speech, and we can go into some Q&A. But one is, for example, if you look at utilizing non-renewable related to market risks. And the example, at least in Europe, that I now see is coal-fired power plants. So what you see is a sharp drop in demand for electricity due to COVID. And what you see is that actually coal-fired power is hugely exposed because it is the more expensive way of producing that electricity. So what you actually see is that the decommissioning of some of that coal-fired power plants is actually accelerated, which I think from a circular economy standpoint is exactly the direction we want to head in. But if you're running a coal-fired power plant, you're exposed to this linear way of doing. And then another one is really if you are, for example, in the business of producing and supplying household appliances or electronics for that matter, and you really do not yet take responsibility for those products along their supply chain and their lifetime, related also to the legal risk from a marketing perspective, I think the extended producer responsibilities that we now in Europe see much more tightening in the Green Deal that the European Commission announced. That is really, if you're in a linear way of business, that is a sheer risk. And at the same time, it's a circular opportunity if you want to be ahead of that and really pivot in terms of your business model to make your business future-proof to those elements. So in summary, I think what we encourage and what I encourage you to do is at least to get a better understanding of your exposure to linear risk, to systematize them for your business. And maybe my final remark would be that much of that can then focus on the company level. But as COVID very clearly shows, is that also on the value chain level, on the sector level, related to investments, and also to the macroeconomic situation. So probably a global recession, if we're not in it already, then it's about to happen. So basically on all of these levels currently, we see major exposure to that linear risk. And I think we need to make that into circular opportunities, to become aware of them, future-proof our businesses, to really be proactive in restructuring the business, the supply chains, but also the global economy at large. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. And here is the website if you want to learn more of our reports, including on the linear risk paper that I presented here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc. Yeah, it's always astonishing to see the graph and realize how wasteful we are in our economy. And then it's I think it's really important that the society and the business really build a system perspective on what's the context around us, including the material flow, including all the risk. So next one is we have Steve Lai. Steve, you are an expert on supply chain. How do business perceive risk? And then how can business try to manage those risks?
I'm not a, thank you, Shadow. You give me too much compliments. And I'm not as you said, expert, but I'm the practitioner for the, supply chain, doing work for the last almost 3 or 4 decades. And first of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to have a chance to just share my view regarding about this, we'll say, serious or important issue, how we can make this a challenge and try to see if we can return back to the normal. The topic I'm talking to you is a supply chain optimization and resiliency. So all my life here is mostly doing the procurement, sourcing, and the supply management and the supply chain management in the last almost 3 or 4 decades. Then I will see the challenge here. See, the 4th topic I'm going to share with all of you today is first, it's a global brand name company, supply chain management and framework. The many well-known brands, which you may know from the consumer product, from the electronic product, or from all the other products, which all have the Taiwanese content inside or China content inside. The second topic I'm going to share with everyone is called Taiwanese law and competitiveness in the global supply chain. Usually traditional, everybody know we are most likely use a cost-driven or cost competitiveness to try to build a business globally. However, the time has been changed. We need to change our law, not only just to focus on the cost advantage. Meanwhile, we also need to be more likely the value added to try to make more value, provide a value added product or service to the global consumers. The third I'm going to share with how we can learn from this. Then how should we change our mind or change our business model or change our practice for the future. The lastly, but not least, is that Tabian said the development of circular economy. That's the only way. We need to be more innovative and also need to be a more transformation in order to get a new business model. The first one I'm going to share is called a global branding company, how they found out their supply chain and how they made their network. From this slide, you can see all those brand names you are familiar with. All has been either have put their manufacturing operations or their service center, distribution center, retailing store, all in the greater China area, which including traditionally we call China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Every this brand you see here, they all have the service, have the manufacturing in this region, also in these areas. Not only on that, of course, you can see many more. However, for those logo you see here, they are all aligned members of RE100. Very important. I just try to emphasize here. They are all allied members of RE100. RE100 means those companies commit to have a renewable energy with a little year. Someone commit by the 2050, all their products has to be made from renewable energy. Some company commit, I'm going to or will be use 100% renewable energy by year of, for instance, 2025. And I also see some very aggressive company, they made a commitment to have just this year, by end of this year, 2020. All this confirm to us, we need to have a new form of way of life, new form of our manufacturing process, also new form of service behavior, so on and so forth. Okay, then we can see this product, automotive, mostly the components part, I would say probably a two-thirds of the total manufacture made in China. And also some critical parts made in Taiwan or some the other area, all in this region. You are familiar with the 3M product, this is called PPD, personal protective devices. It's very important, especially during this COVID-19, situation, because let's protect your health and safe. 3M is a well-known brand. They have a renewable, also innovative technology. So they do a great job to try to product and enhance and enrich our way of life. They all have their supply chain in greater China areas. Look at these agricultural products, meat products, or the other agricultural products. China have the biggest population worldwide. Of course, those agricultural products have been widely produced in the China areas. Then we call this the closest apparel, like the sports shoes and the sports wear, everything. The most production areas are from China, also with innovation and some research and development effort from Taiwan, because we do implement some innovative technology so to get a new form of the way to make it a clothes, make a sports wear. Dell is computer, the business for the information product has been grooming because of COVID-19 situation in the past 5 or 6 months. The production output, also the shipment from this computer product because of COVID-19 has increased 3 some of them will increase about 4x. That means 400 more shipment because of COVID-19 situation. All these global brands are all located in the region. This is what we call how important the role of the Greater China, that's mean China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, has been playing during the global supply chain. Then we look at how the Taiwan's role and competitive in the global supply chain. You look at it, so we also review how the country is strong or not. We look at about their performance, we call gross domestic product. Usually the short term we call GDP. Do we have a formula from the macroeconomic theory to tell us? The GDP formula equals domestic consumption plus domestic investment and the government expenditure and then export and then import. From this simple chart, you can see almost 2/3 of countries outside of Taiwan actually rely on the export. However, meanwhile, we don't have so much natural resources. So more than half of the raw materials, some of the machinery, some of the equipment has to rely on the import. So make this become the most business activity we call the external trade because a major contribution to the Taiwanese economy. We take an example about the performance from Taiwan, the GDP equals $600 billion for the 2019. The growth rate is about 2-3%. We totally rely on several areas. For instance, everybody knows Taiwanese has very strong electronics and semiconductors, and also precision machinery, also some sports wheel as well. That's all the import to almost every country worldwide. Secondly, the business model we rely on the electronic manufacturing service, which we call the EMS, or we call the original equipment manufacturing. We are making the product according to original equipment manufacturer specification, according to the rule to do the work, to do the product. Some aggressive company, innovative company also provide a called ODM service, called original design manufacturing. The client or well-known global brand company only provide a kind of concept, the feature. Then the local company in Taiwan provide all the design and make all product, only the component, layout, everything. That's a 3 different kind of business model. Is mostly to help Taiwanese to make a most export business. However, I want to quote one quotation from Charles Huang, who is also our panelist today, say that Taiwan certainly have some challenges. We call the 5, he calls a 5 low. Low means, although we enjoy very significant economic growth, meanwhile, we are also suffering from 5 different lows of situation. The good ones we call low price or low cost. However, it's not healthy because the lower price cost on energy, water, and the land cost, environmental cost, interest rate is not a fair financing situation, also tax. Which all these are 4 create one very unfavorable situation. Our people has been low pay, low salary, low wage, which is not healthy, not fair, especially when the people work so dedicatedly. This creates only the social problem, also the future economic growth problem. Then we see the next slide here. We also can see, I mentioned about the strengths for Taiwanese product. For instance, like electronic components, information product, although the COVID-19 creates some unfavorable situation, still we enjoy pretty much good growth, even last 4 months from the January to April 2020 versus 2019. We are still pretty much growth situation. For instance, we export to China, we still enjoy about 30% growth for the electronic component, and it's 26% more for the information product. Even to the globally, we still have about a 24.3% growth for the electronic component and a 12%, almost 30% for the growth for the information product. All this together, we call Taiwanese strengths. We make all the business from Taiwan still keep growing, although the percentage may not be good as the previous years. However, like we still suffer about the other negative growth for the primary metals and the chemical products, transportation equipment, and the textile. This one has been mostly from demand side, negative demand side. Then, what we should learn, although we have learned from the COVID-19 and what impact we have, basically I would want to list the other point we should say. The first one we call the supply chain interruption. So because we locked down the country in order to protect the virus, so all the business activity like business travel, tourism has been temporarily suspended. So no people can be allowed for traveling according to the borders. Also, the economical equilibrium of supply and demand now is an imbalance. The supply side mostly already be covered. However, demand side for European country, American country still has been not really yet back to the normal. Work from home becomes normal, and online business activity as an alternative or become a new approach. Even when our COVID-19 has been under control, still online business, online work will become a new approach. On-site consumption is limited, sometimes even zero in last 4 months. So back to here, 2 issues we need to look at is the business continuity and the risk mitigation become the key to survive. Lastly, I want to share how we can encounter this, make our change our business behavior, or in the future, call it how our consumption. We call it development.
I'm looking at the time. You have to go faster.
Okay, I only have 1 minute. Okay, I can finish there. Thank you. The last one, not least, is development of circular economy through innovation and transformation. Here we call it CRISPR. We can say we are not able to expect for the country high growth like China, always about a double-digit growth. I would say always a single-digit growth, not even the negative growth in the next probably 2 or 3 decades if we don't change our consumption behavior. Secondly, this one, the headline from one of the news called the Trump invested $1 million bring drug making back to US. So China as a manufacturing center globally, the situation and the position has been changed. So last slide I have here is we need to have a paradigm shift from like a traditional manufacturing to service oriented. The Taiwan has made a more value-added product service to replace only cost-driven on the cost competitiveness. We had to leverage called ABCDE. We call it artificial intelligence and blockchain, cloud data analytics, and emerging technology. The one is we had to have the global supply chain initiative and green consumption and a circular economy. That's 2 solutions. And these 2 concepts should be deeply rooted about green and circular into the childhood through the education, not only just family, of course, most importantly, the school. So finally, I said innovation and transformation should be the way for the future economic growth. And thank you for everyone listening. I didn't handle very well about the video, but I really enjoyed this sharing with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. It was indeed very interesting talk, and I realized that really the supply chain is extremely complex and deeply connected. So next one we have Freek. Freek, he is an expert on circular economy, and he worked with many Dutch companies. So I think you have a lot of interesting and inspiring stories on how Dutch companies react to this risk and managing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shadow. So at the start of this webinar, I gave you a gloomy picture of the economy in the Netherlands thanks to COVID-19. But let me share also some positive aspects with you. You would expect that industry would be very reluctant to take up sustainable, let's say, cost and efforts on their neck now that they're suffering a lot. But actually the contrary is the case. On June 18, 250 very influential CEOs in the Netherlands, they wrote a letter in a national newspaper. And what they said, actually, this is the moment to push sustainability forward, that we have to embrace this European Green Deal, that SDGs should be incorporated in our way of working, and that we should use this massive European recovery fund to invest in cleaner energy, cleaner mobility, sustainable circular production and consumption, etc. And with regard to the ambitious Dutch climate, let's say, agreement, they said, well, continue, please, and even accelerate if you can. But they even mentioned that a global level playing field is very important in all these aspects, because you cannot isolate yourself in that. Now, maybe some words on the European Green Deal to which we refer. As you know, the Netherlands wants to be a front runner in Europe with regard to circular economy. And Europe wants to be a front runner in the world. And this European Green Deal is massive because the EU wants to be climate neutral by 2050 and launches really a massive series of initiatives to protect the environment, but at the same time boost the economy. Now, what does this mean for circular economy, for instance? That means that Europe will take measures for sustainable product policy framework, so changing the way we make and consume products. It's about design, empowering consumers. It's about production, sustainable production processes. It's a clear focus on seven value chains: electronics, batteries, packaging, plastics, textiles, construction and building, and food, water and nutrients. Traditionally, it has been a lot about waste, but now it's about less waste and more value. But it's also about people and regions and cities. So about skills and job creation, urban initiatives, stakeholder initiatives. It's about cross-cutting teams, linking circular economy with climate neutrality. We'll get back to that later. It's about getting the economics right. It's about R&D prioritization. It's about taking the lead in the world, like global plastic initiatives, global circular economy alliances, international agreements on managing natural resources. And it's also about things like monitoring. What is a circular economy? What are the metrics? How do we deal with resource use? How can you measure the efforts? So it will mean a lot if we have Europe taking up the pace and taking it with it. Now back to us, my little country, the Netherlands. It's situated in a very vulnerable delta. Well, as you know, we have been working on, let's say, on keeping our feet dry since the Middle Ages. We have been working on waste management for over 150 years, but it's only 4 years or so that we really embrace circular economy. And we have this moonshot ambition, you know, to be fully circular in 2050. And in just 10 years from now, we want to have half the use of non-renewable resources. So that was 2060, the ambition. A year later, we managed to get support from a broad coalition. Another year later, we written down our plans in 5 transition agendas for building, agro-food, manufacturing, consumer goods, and plastics. Another year later, our government approved it. And last year, we really made a specific implementation plan. And that's not only about markets, it's also about interventions, about legislation, using the carrot and the stick, so market incentives, access to financing. It's the knowledge agenda, it's impacting behavior of people, and it's internationalization. And that's basically some of the work that we do. Now, where are we standing today? Now I have to look at Marc, virtually at least. We just had published a circular gap report on the Netherlands, and we are 24.5% circular today. Well, that's probably better than we had expected, but we're 75.5%, we are not circular. So we still have quite some work to do. Now we are, of course, experiencing COVID-19, and COVID-19 will ask for more resilience. It will ask for shorter supply chains. COVID-19, as Steve said, it will definitely accelerate the digitization. And what I like, and maybe that's the biggest win from COVID-19, it has increased awareness. We appreciate clean air, we treasure healthy food, we enjoy cycling in nature and walking more than ever. And I think with all this, there is a direct fit with circular economy, because let's say it means that we keep resources in circulation as long as possible. We keep them at their highest value. We respect biodiversity, its social inclusiveness. The energy is renewable. It makes so much sense. Now, let me just give you a few examples from the Netherlands, from business models which might thrive now. The first one is the company Arend. This produce and supply office furniture. Now, they especially mentioned that in the months after COVID-19 lockdown, the demand for revitalized product is really booming. So let's say lots of their clients mainly buy chairs so their employees can work well at home. But now they can supply these revitalized chairs through their company called Arend Reuse, because the chairs are already there. There are no need for production. Let's say if you think a little bit bigger, and this is a company that Taiwan will know very well, it's ASML. It's an innovation leader in the semiconductor industry with very strong links to Taiwan. And they also embrace circular economy. Let's say the modular design of their products allows to use us to extract the maximum value from the materials we use and repurpose their products across the life cycle. They have, for example, the ASML lithography system, which has a refurbished, refurbished circular version. They have a massive, let's say, reducing waste program. And the ambition they have is cutting the amount of waste per revenue by 50%, 50 by 2025. So definitely something to explore also together in the supply chain. Another one, we're talking COVID, we're talking healthcare and healthcare market. It's expected to grow rapidly. There will also be a huge increase in demand for affordable medical scanners. So Philips Healthcare anticipate this by going circular, by keeping the vital parts into circulation, high quality equipment with a full warranty, but can provide it as a much lower cost. Now, as you all know, and this is vital to rethink also the design of your products, in the design phase, 80% of the environmental footprint is determined, 80%. Now, the Dutch Fairphone offers inspiration by sustainably sourced modular phone, and which allows for component upgrading instead of phone upgrading. The last example which I share, because I could go on, is if you keep the ownership of a product, you keep the responsibility and you can optimize the material lifespan and energy use. Now Signify, formerly Philips, they do not sell lamps, but offer light as a service successfully in the Netherlands. For example, in the Edge, that's the building with the highest BREEAM score in the world. And it allows you to work on a modular design, energy efficient LED technology, upgradable components, easy maintenance, and design for disassembly and recycling. Now, the energy savings for customers are really significant. And of course, you keep the materials close to you. Now, of course, these circular economy examples are always nice and cuddly and people love them and they treasure them and they all want one in their back garden. But I want to bring your attention to the reality and point at the skill ahead of us, because the challenge is huge. There is a sense of urgency, and I will illustrate it with the climate agreement in the Netherlands. Now, back in 2017, we had a coalition agreement, and it said that we had to reduce carbon dioxide emissions with 49% in 2030 and 95% in 2050. So this is really a serious commitment. We had a climate agreement, a stakeholder agreement, and all the sectors agreed, electricity, mobility, industry, agriculture, society, built environment, how we should do that. We have clear pathways for 5 domains. And we're now setting out the knowledge and innovation agenda. And we translate it into a policy portfolio. Now I want you to look a little bit, I want to give you an idea of the magnitude between now and 2030. This means cutting emissions by 75% in the production of power, 75%. It's reducing emissions by 30% in buildings and mobility sector. And in industry, we're talking about a 40% cut. That's 10 years from now. So this is no incremental improvement. This is massive. It's really a system change. You need everybody on board. Now look on the picture on your left and you see what it means for the Netherlands. All the energy will have to be renewable. For us, that means especially offshore wind. So you have massive investment in offshore wind. Then of course you have to bring this energy back to the let's say the mainland to connect it. So you need the energy infrastructure. It could be hydrogen, it could be just electricity cables, etc. Then there is installation of buildings, all buildings. It's decarbonizing, let's say, mobility. And then the industry, the future of the industry will mean it will be powered by renewable energy. And the input for the energy will be either bio-based or carbon dioxide or waste as a resource. So it's also about capture and utilization. This is an energy transition, a circular transition. It's really, really massive. And that means you have to work together, you have to act together. Nobody can do this alone. Industry is dependent from the energy supply, from mobility, etc., etc. So we have to really plan, also as a government, you have to plan your R&D. And that means going from demonstration to piloting, to demonstrating an operational environment, to full employment, let's say. And it has to thrive, of course, in a commercial environment without any subsidy. So just the first years of such a transition, our government has to spend probably 500 million euros a year in institute financing, subsidies, tax debates. In the years after, you're talking about a 3 billion bill for, let's say, feed-in renewable tariff, CO2 abatement. And after that, you have to institutionalize it in legislation, in policies, CO2 levies, norms. So the government has a role to play here. Now, to conclude, I would say a circular economy can be our blueprint, but the effort is massive. Now is the time to think big. Now is the time to deliver and to scale. And nobody can do it alone. We need to do it together. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Freek. It's so inspiring to see so much commitment to tackle this climate challenging and circular and linear challenge. Yeah. And the next one, we have Leanne. Leanne, you're an entrepreneur yourself, and you're building this innovation ecosystem in Queensland, in Australia. And I'm curious, what's your view on this economic recovery?
Well, the economic recovery is absolutely critical. And I must say, what an outstanding job each of the speakers today. We've really positioned the importance of it, not only in a local market, but a global market. We're fast moving to a global realization of the world upon which we stand. And to be honest with you, part of my discussion today is really focusing in on the nexus point of where business change occurs in the world is typically found at that public-private partnership overlay, or at the intersection of business and government. And of course, it's a critical time to start thinking about this today, particularly as we start to embrace the circular economy moving into the future. I'm one of the global chairs for the World Economic Forum, Queensland's chief entrepreneur, and also one of the policy advisors to the OECD on circular economy. And most business leaders and policymakers are tuned into a frequency, an economic frequency, scanning the airways for information that is going to influence decisions. But the big question for me with circular economy and post-COVID environment, is this really working? Are we currently innovating quickly enough to meet the challenges faced by society? You know, the rapid onset of climate change, growing financial inequity, as well as record lows in consumer trust suggests that it's not working. So perhaps a part of this change is around our leaders needing to break down the walls of an echo chamber. Rather than fixing a dial to their favorite station, what's been heard now in the recovery process of COVID, going back to this new normal, let's call it Comfort FM, that maybe they need to scan the different channels or the airwaves to have valuable conversations and listen to where these are taking place. And most certainly, circular economy is one of those radio changes that are required. So look, after all, what happens if we're at a point where we are tipping on a nexus? We risk like a dog whistle moment where our leaders don't hear the right high-pitched signaling of the alarm, the pace of change that can stall instead of accelerate. And as we know, COVID-19 pandemic has revealed some really stirring examples of where and how social biorhythms and fast-tracking innovation is critically important to the shared needs. When we think about in the midst of COVID, supermarket, engineering firms, even perfume agencies have attracted the headlines for pivoting quickly to vulnerable communities. And when we start to think about a more equitable, climate conscious approach, can companies as well as governments and even entrepreneurs come onto an entirely new wavelength of thinking? Social currency is increasing and impacting the bottom line, and awareness and concern about stakeholder value, which of course was discussed in Davos in January this year, where the primary shareholder profits are actually put aside for the value of community, people and planet at large. Now, we've been talking about climate and environment and sustainability for decades, but of course, circular economy is the economic world. Trust is a language that all nations must speak fluently. The business drivers of trust and confidence were once notoriously difficult to measure, but now we only need to look at a company's profit and loss. Consumer campaigns are on the streets championing change with their wallets, and leaders, whether you're the CEO or the Prime Minister or the President of a country, therefore need to look to expand their bandwidth or risk missing out on crucial intelligence. And that crucial intelligence, particularly around circular economy, is being fast formed in not only new methods of advanced manufacturing, but also the creation of material science. You know, what was once single-use plastics can now be reformed into cyclone-grade construction material. And in no less than the last 5 years alone, we've seen how quickly the context can change. Whether it be the Me Too movement, Trumpism, Brexit, the emergence of Greta Thunberg, the rising youth, and now today, we are talking right in the midst of the COVID crisis. And what will the legacy of this outbreak, of corona outbreak, be? Is it now the ability for governments and corporations to really start thinking about global supply chains and national politics coming together? It's the first time I've certainly seen and heard this nationalisation of supply chains coming into the forefront of thinking. And as Australia has boasted so well in its COVID response, we are more concerned about our economic recovery than ever before. We're a nation of inventors, astrologists, geologists. We hold some of the oldest Indigenous tribes in the world. And yet when we think about the custodianship that we hold for not only natural resources, but also, of course, our natural talent, we're seeing supply chains move from supply chains to value chains, and more recently to risk chains. We're also seeing stakeholder value being understood, which is moving away from just shareholder value. And most importantly, in a country like Australia and a state like Queensland, we're seeing the migration from natural mining to urban mining, the beating heart of circular economy. Look, and it's hard to imagine transparency, traceability, and trust won't rise further up the agenda of not only corporations, but also government leaders, officials, and policymakers. And let's hope that everyone does so in the collaboration of spirit rather than of suspicion. When we think about this digital metaphysics, as we begin to embrace the circular economy, and particularly the work out of the World Economic Forum, if we accept that connectivity is now an integral part of the way society functions, how can we start to create a digital twin of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? And where does a circular economy fit in those needs triangles? At the very base, of course, sits with Wi-Fi as a basic human right, and the building right the way up to the different roles of where not only public-private partnerships lie, but the roles of technology as it plays out in safety, love, our sense of esteem, and self-actualization. This pandemic has double underlined the importance of connectivity and technologies, whether that be material science in trying to understand how we can use mushroom and reform it into mushroom leather. The question of ethics, of course, must therefore be at the forefront of every single discussion, whether it is in artificial intelligence or technologies like blockchain. The decision we take now will resonate for years into the future, if not decades. And if we get it wrong, future generations will condemn our irresponsibility. And now is the time. We've turned a new decade. It was so rightfully said that this is the year for change and the decade for action. It's time to get it right, and we can make our planet a fairer and more pleasant place to live. And in the same way that waste is now swallowing the world, the repercussions of short-termism could actually prove to be quite catastrophic. And if I was to be a visionary, which one said that I was at one stage, I will share the closing remarks around the vision for 2030 for the world. You know, by then we're living in a global circular economy. This has become intentionally transparent. This is an open mindset that has released a surge of trust throughout the entirety of the world's supply chains that encourages high visibility and greater control over responsible sourcing. Now we have an ethical and sustainable circular supply chain in which rewards are shared equally, right from local communities through to primary consumers and beyond. We are manufacturing not only for first-time use, but for second-time use. We are thinking about how do we design for disassembly. Fourth industrial revolution technologies such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, even nanotechnologies have helped to facilitate the tracking of critical metals and minerals right the way from the mine to the consumer. Transparency is heralded a new normal in which raw materials we use for manufacturing and construction can be traced from the moment they're extracted through to the first time use, remanufacture, and eventually deconstruction and reuse. In 2030, we won't be having conversations like this. Nobody will be talking about the circular economy because it's the economy. The hard yards in increasing societal prosperity while reducing dependence on primary materials and energy have been done. We winced at the grim days of 2010 when billions of tons of materials were extracted every year and only a fraction of it was recycled back into our landfills. Governments was once the nexus point to spark the revolution. From Shanghai to New York to Mumbai to Brisbane, the authorities enter a new arena and we're waiting for the development to run its course. The corporates are actually leading the way. So I want to thank everyone today for contributing to this most amazing conference. I'm looking forward to 2030 because in all of our shared vision, we'll share an economy that is restorative and regenerative, that preserves the ecosystem and increases return over time. It creates prosperity and fuels growth by capturing more value from existing infrastructure and products than ever before. So I know it sounds good to all of our speakers and everyone listening. So I'll see you there, 2030. It's not far away.
Thank you, Leanne. I really hope that in 10 years, we hope host this webinar and it will not be a circular economy webinar. It will be an economy webinar. The next speaker, we have Charles. Charles is, people call Charles the godfather of circular economy in Taiwan. And I'm curious of your view. What do you see the opportunities for Taiwan as well as for this world?
Okay, thank you, Shadow, and thank you, everyone, all the presenters and all the friends who are listening in and watching the webinar. And I think Leanne Kemp's presentation serves a very good platform for me to dive into my portion of sharing. And my title of my speech, or the speech, is called Circular 2040. Instead of the 2030 that Leanne talked about, I have stretched it beyond for another 10 years. And the notion behind that is that we need to think generationally. It's about next generation. It's not about our next 10 years. It's about people who were born today. And when they reach the age of 20, what kind of world are we leaving them with? So why 2040 more specifically? You know, one thing I learned being in the industries and then also serving the government, I always like to say everything is possible. And especially if you stretch it out beyond the current horizon to 20 years. So you create a notion of positivities by going beyond the current generation. And secondly is that, like I said earlier, we need to think for our future generation. In fact, our foundation's mission for creating or promoting circular economy, it's not about our generation, it's about our future generation. It's not to leave the problems behind for future generations. And before I leave this page, I will share a little bit anecdote here. You know, I've always been challenged and accused of being a dreamer. But I like to use a paraphrase William Butler Yeats' point about dreams. He said, in dreams begins with responsibilities. And what I like to do is that to invite all of us, all the speakers and the entire audience, which, you know, of every one of us, I think we all have dreams. And like I said, what lies behind the dreams is a lot of responsibilities. Okay, let me push forward to our today's agenda. Over the last few months, I have been asked from time to time, you know, what we, Circular Economy Foundation, see the post-pandemic lessons learned. And let me quickly recap. And what you will find is that in my presentation, it almost summarized quite a bit of the topics and issues discussed by the previous speakers. And it's the benefit of being the last speaker, I guess. We are able to do a little recap for everyone here. And when I'm asked about the pandemics, and I always feel, well, is it about green stimulus, the details of green stimulus programs, what kind of contents and insights are necessary? But here I'd like to share with you the lesson I learned from this pandemic. Very simply, it proves that there's a problem exists. And what is the problem? That is, linear economic model is fragile. It's too fragile. And there's an urgent need to redesign. And where is the solution? Solution lies in redesigning for resiliency. And to do that, we need to accelerate transformation to circular economy. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the pandemic tells me that what we are doing as a foundation promoting circular economy is on the right path. We simply need to accelerate that. And underneath this problem and solution paradigm, it begs for a paradigm shift from recover to reinvent, as I mentioned earlier today. You know, and I think Marc summarized very, very well in detail. The problem with the linear economy, this is not only degenerative, it's not only destructive, it's very fragile. And we need to embrace circularity to be more restorative and to have a more regenerative economy, and finally to be more resilient, less risky. So my whole discussion here is that let's accelerate the process towards circular economy. Now, how do you accelerate circular economy? And I'd like to paraphrase again another gentleman by name of Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Therefore, our undertaking, our challenge is that how do we build the economy of future, like Kemp said, you know, to make circular economy the new model and to displace the outdated linear economy. And how do you do that? We have to start from the very beginning. We have to redefine our growth. What is meant when we talk about growth in a society? And there are two levels I'd like to share with you. One is at the national level. Okay, we need to move away from GDP to SDGs. I'll share some of the thoughts on the GDP with the audience here. In 1968, Robert Kennedy made a point, and very sarcastically. He said, GDP measures everything except what's important in life. In other words, GDP, underneath the GDP, there's a lot of elements which are not conducive to positive growth, and they're actually conducive to negative growth. And we need to move beyond GDP to SDG. And actually, one of our Nobel Prize winner, Joseph Stiglitz, put it even more bluntly a few months ago. He said, it's time to kill GDP. So we need to redefine growth at a national level. And it's up to us to work with the government and leaders or politicians about that. Also, we need to redefine the growth on the industrial sectors. We need to go beyond simple shareholder interest to broader stakeholders. When I speak of the stakeholders, I'm not simply talking about consumers or employees and all that. All that are very important beyond the financial equity shareholders. What's more important is that we need to be caring about the environment. We have to be caring about the ecological system. So redefining the growth is fundamental because that's the foundation of developing a new economic model. Secondly, as a human, we need to rethink. For 150 years, we have been living in an economy that is resource dependent. We need to move away from that. We need to rethink what the needs are. For example, we need to think, actually, as human beings, we need usage of products rather than ownership of products. And this is one of the very key elements or foundations of circular economy. So redefining by looking at what is growth for us and what our really genuine needs are is very critical in developing a new business model or new economic model. Now, following the redefining, once we define our needs, we need to design our economy. And obviously the topic itself can go hours and hours in our discussions, but I'll try to make it very succinct. Here is a roadmap that we have put together on transition to circular economy, begin with the SDGs and the 3 elements of circular economy, which I'll elaborate in a minute. And then based on these three culture or new paradigm shift in circular economy, what can we do or what should we do if you are in the industry to pursue a redesigning of a technical cycle? If you are in the bio area, what would be a biological cycle look like? First off, the first one is product as a service. I think the concept is very, very well talked about, so I will not go into detail except summarizing. It's a concept about our needs being in not so much owning the product, but paying for the performance. By shifting that consumer needs from selling the product, or in other words, product economy to service economy, the industry can move from one-time transaction to long-term partnership with the customer. And this is a very important part of it. Second part is high value utilization. There is no such thing as waste in the world. We need to rethink resources as 100% useful. And how do you make them useful? One of the concepts is that we need to give all resources identity, and that information, make it transparent, and they will naturally become useful resources, which would improve the efficiency. And the aim of this high value utilization is that we need to ascertain what we call 3-0, a world with zero waste, zero emission, and zero risk. The third paradigm shift is what we call cooperative culture. In a linear economy, it's about competition. It's about striving on your own. But in circular economy, it's about collaborating. Last year, around October time in Taiwan, we held the first Asia Pacific Circular Economy Roundtable. We have put together a report summarizing or collecting stories from Taiwanese companies. There are total 66 stories with 360 companies working together. And the book can be or is accessible through our websites, and here is the QR code. There are 4 topics included in this book. It's related to agro, food, and biomass industry, textile and plastic, construction and transportation, and finally, technology and chemistry. Finally, let me summarize what I said earlier just now. In order to have, we talk about what we should do post-pandemic. and we need to have a package of green stimulus program. The way I see that, as I mentioned earlier, I see green stimulus as an engine to accelerate CE transition. And how is it an engine to accelerate CE transition? Number one, the green stimulus we need to look at it as a topic that should be shared and should be collaborated across border. In other words, it should be viewed as a borderless initiative. Okay, it's not a Taiwan, it's not a Holland, it's not an Australian initiative. We need to work together. Secondly, when we speak of partnership in circular economy, it's not about partnership between you and I. It's you and I also with the mother nature as well. We need to be inclusive in the partnership beyond the Homo sapiens. The third one is, Leanne spoke earlier about policy. It's about leadership commitments, okay, to promote, to transition, or to invent the economy. So policy alignment as a top-down elements of a workable and accelerated circular economy-driven green stimulus program. And finally, we need to build what we call a social movement from bottom up to get people to buy into this particular transition, including we need to convince consumers to change their behaviors and whatnot. So green stimulus program include all these 4 critical elements. Now, what Taiwan has done over the last few years, we have a pretty extensive outreach beyond Taiwan's border. As I mentioned earlier, it is about inclusiveness of all countries. It's about borderless topic. We need to work together on circular economy. And our outreach have extended to South America and Europe and Africa, and of course, nations from down under, both Australia and New Zealand. To summarize, to recap, and I think this is a great platform for us to meet together. And I see this webinar as only the beginning. It's not the end. It's a first visit. It's an excellent try for us to collaborate. And our foundation will continue to invite to work with every one of you. And under the premise, or you must have heard this, this is an African proverb. You know, we together can go much further. If we try to go fast, we can go alone. But if we want to move further and move firmer, we need to go together. Okay, thank you very much for listening on the webinar today. And any inputs you have on my presentation is welcome.
Thank you, Charles. It reminds me of a proverb from a Native American. It says that we don't inherit this world from our ancestors, but we borrow it from our children. So it's really important that we have this generational responsibility. And limited by time, so I will just ask my last question to all the panelists. For me, you are all warriors that's fighting for a better future together. So I would like to ask pearl of wisdom from you, a personal advice to give to all our participants. It could be during the course of your circular economy exploration or reflections from this pandemic. So who would like to start? Perhaps Marc?
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much. Again, really great to hear all of these different angles into the debate. I think starting with an obvious pearl of wisdom, I really encourage kind of this global fora where we exchange ideas, because we need to do this together. But maybe closer to the content of my speak, I think also in the circular economy transition, we need to better understand where we are and how we can move ahead, and where are the big bang for the buck to move forward. So I really encourage people and organizations and economies to really see and understand the facts from where to move, and be able also to track progress to where they're heading. So not to kind of do that blindly, but based on good facts and good understanding of the matter. And then it's a matter of just kind of doing it and bringing it to practice.
I might say a couple of words, Shadow. There's a great saying that my friends have often reminded me of, which is sacred reciprocity, that everything in life is ani, which is, of course, from the relationship that we hold in the chemical reactions within the matters. By treating the earth with respect, we also learn how to treat each other with respect. And by expressing gratitude for what we've been given, we also receive even more to be thankful for. So I think that sums up both COVID and the circular economy in a perfect way.
If I can chip in something as well from the Netherlands, these are highly uncertain times, but I always like that the best way to predict the future is just to create it. Lead by example, inspire others, collaborate. I think we've gotten a sneak preview what collective dependency means, and this is just a wake-up call for a bigger crisis around the horizon. And as Marc said, maybe this is a meteorite and we have the risk of planets colliding. So take leadership, show the way.
Okay. I'm always speaking from a supply chain point of view. For the supply chain, we should consider and always think it twice. Whether should we or should we not to consume any resource anymore? The resource is always limited, and we should use most innovative way, a creative way to try to think about the concept of circular economy. Don't ever go back to a linear economy, and this is the only way we can survive in the next few decades. We only have one planet, so we have to be very, very concerning ourselves also for all the people around the world, and think of it twice before you consume.
Okay, my turn?
Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of pearls of wisdom if I have
just
given
one.
time. Just one. Okay, sorry. Well, you know, I have spent a lot of time promoting circular economy, and generally when I talk about circular economy, especially, you know, the 3 zeros: zero waste, zero emission, zero risk. And my colleagues from industry always tell me that, you know, it's impossible. And the reason is very simple. You all know that. You know, a lot of people were the benefactors of the old economy. So they are averse to change, and they are indifferent to change, and sometimes averse to change. So what I have done is that I think it's important to bring everybody or give everybody a reason for moving forward in transitioning to circular economy. That is about for future generation. What I'm trying to say is that I think the notion of working for future generation is a common denominator. And it should be, and rightly so, it should be the common denominator. So in other words, you know, let's try to instill in each other the concept of working for next generation, not to leave the problem for future generation. And with that, I want to make a sort of paraphrase, and again, another very famous person whom some of you may know, especially with gray hair, a gentleman named Bob Marley, a singer. How many of you know Bob Marley? Then I know how old you are. You're shaking your head. Oh, you guys are in trouble. Well, one of the things he said, I think in one of his music was this: if you live for yourself, you live in vain. But if you live for others, you live again and again. So with that, you know, let's continue to collaborate and work, you know, for a better future and for others. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to share some words as well. I think in this COVID period, what I learned is that in front of life and death, names, vanities, wealth, they're not so important, you know. So I think what I learned is to really follow the voice in your heart and then work hard for it. Yeah. So thank you very much. It has been a very fruitful discussion, and some of us suffer a little bit from technical issues, but I think great intention can make up for it. So in coming weeks, Circular Taiwan Network, we will organize another 2 webinars, actually one on how Taiwan can move forward with the demonstration from front runners. And the third one will be a co-create workshop where everyone has the term to express your voice. And then we build up these future together. So I highly recommend you to register for the coming events. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The last one is we have a survey. Please click the survey and then give us some comments about how do you like this webinar? How do you like the content? How do you like the speech? And then are there the operation smooth and fluent? And we do have actually a homework for you. So if you can say something to your government, what a green recovery or green stimulus will look like. So click the link and then tell us what you think. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope to see you in the coming future. And we don't talk about circular economy, just the economy.